All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of a Hard Knock Podcast. This is a platform where marginalized and aspiring entrepreneurs can be inspired by, learn from, and support other entrepreneurs who might just be a few steps ahead of them. So I want to thank Monica for joining us for this episode. Monica is a business coach and consultant. With her business, You Want to Do What? I think I'm saying that right. So thank you so much for coming and joining me.
No, thank you so much, Ryan, for having me. And it's funny, I love to hear how people pronounce "you want to do what?" Because I'm from New York. So when I first came up with it, it was like with a little bit of an attitude because it's like really me talking to myself when I would come up with different ideas of "you want to do what?" But in this this way that was like a little aggressive. But I love meeting people from other parts of the country because I'm like, oh, you were raised so healthy. Like you say it with such like a nice positive attitude. And so it's nice to hear. But everyone from New York, I promise you, says it with a little bit of sass.
I gotta hear it. How is it with the sass? Did I
It
get it
was
right?
more.
Or
So you said it a little bit nicely. So mine, the way I
okay,
say it to myself is, you want to do what? Like that kind of challenging myself attitude. Yeah, it's pretty
I get
bad.
it.
I'm
That's
working
what's
on it.
up. That's what's up, though. That's what's up. So, actually, can you kind of just share with us, like, what inspired you to start it, and yeah, tell us a little bit about your journey, kind of establishing this coaching business.
No, absolutely. So I started as my career as in corporate marketing many, many years ago. And so I loved marketing for a very, very long time, and I still love marketing. But I was moving into different companies, and there was a reorg that was happening in the last company that I was with. And then there was another reorg. And I felt like I kept moving just a little bit away from the thing that I really loved doing. And one day I started to look around and I was feeling like I don't feel as competent in this role, and the things that I wanted to do that sort of came easily weren't coming easily anymore. And I started to doubt myself. But the reality is, this corporate reorg had happened multiple times. And now I was working in a group that I didn't exactly sign up for. So when I signed the paperwork to join the company, it was to do one role. But it's a large organization, so headcounts come and go and your resources. And when changes happen, you move over where you have to move. And so while I was doubting myself, really what was happening is that I was in a function at the job that I never really intended to be in. But what it had done was really started to break my confidence down. And I felt like if you've ever seen a Christmas tree and you have the Christmas lights and one bulb goes off, you don't really notice. But then one day you come in and you're like, what happened to the lights? That was me. I felt internally like all my lights had started to shut off. And one day a friend called me and she called me on my cell and I answered, and all from the strength of the hello, she said, oh, I didn't know you were in the office. And I said, how did you know? She said, I hear that your voice sounds like you're disconnected from your body every time you're in the office. And I knew like at that point I needed to make a change because what I thought I was sort of masking and just kind of like, well, it's called work, it's not called fun. Like it is like that. I was sort of rationalizing that a lot in my head. But then I decided I needed to make a change. And I tried to interview at a bunch of different places. And I realized that it wasn't about the company, it was that I had changed and I wanted to do something differently. And so I started podcasting back in 2016 or 2017. And so it was called You Want to Do What? Because it was this idea of like, who am I to podcast? I'm this in this corporate space and I've done all of these. I've worked for big companies in banking and tech and consulting. And I just didn't think at the time that anybody was going to want to hear what I had to say. So it took me about 3 years from when I actually bought the mic at the end of 2013 until I actually started the show. So now here I am all these years later, and I have a consulting practice and a coaching business where I take anybody who has an expertise and I teach them how to build a personal brand using their expertise. And I was the first case study. I went from this corporate background to becoming someone that I wanted to be and really created an identity for myself that was more in alignment with the vision I always had for myself. But because of life circumstances, I had taken a different route.
Wow, that's an amazing story. And I definitely can relate to that feeling of like when you join a company and you're excited when you come in, you're doing one role, and then next thing you know, you're doing something completely different. And
Yeah.
it's really good. I like what you said about recognizing that it really wasn't an issue with the with the company, but you like you changed, and I think that that's okay. Like, we normally start our careers going off in one trajectory, and we're so afraid of that change.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. Um, in on that kind of journey, as you started making that transition into your podcast and your consulting and all that, what were some of the biggest hurdles in the early stages of your business, and how did you tackle them?
The truth is, the biggest hurdle was always me. And even now in my business, I still feel like whenever there's a hurdle or a roadblock, I have to check myself and say, what am I doing to contribute to this roadblock continuing to be there? And so, excuse me. So it starts again with the podcast. I could have said to you, hey, Ryan, I've had a podcast since 2013, and we'd be talking about 10 years in the game at this point. But instead, it took me 3 years before I started it because of myself. No one else was telling me don't start a podcast because actually, when I first started the show, I didn't tell anybody that I launched it. So I didn't come out with this huge rollout, and I'm in marketing. I would never advise like one of my clients, like, oh yes, create a show, but then tell no one, right? So, but for me, it was because I kept talking myself out of it that I needed to just dive off the cliff at that point. So that was the first roadblock, that was myself. And then a lot of times I'll have ideas and I'll sit on ideas or anything around, I don't know, pitching to companies. I've been a paid speaker for a really long time. So pitching to companies or coming up with workshop ideas or whatever those things are, I have always been the number one barrier. Once I get over whatever's going on in my head and really work through the mindset, which is why I think it's like the most critical piece for people to work on, once I do that, I'm rolling. Rejection rolls off my back. I just chalk it up as it's a part of the game. But the biggest block has always been myself.
Wow. So what when did you kind of come to that realization, and how do you are there any like rituals or things that you do to help you kind of overcome that self-imposed hurdle?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one, I'm a really big journaler, but even if someone listening to this isn't a journaler, you have voice notes on your phone. Really, what you're trying to do is challenge your thoughts. So, the first thing is an awareness of you might think, like, oh, I'm not doing something because I'm tired, or I'm not doing something because I don't have resources, or I don't have a skill, or I haven't been able to connect, or I'm waiting for somebody to email me back. All of those things are kind of excuses that we tell ourselves, to be quite honest, to stop us from actually going, because there's ways to get around the things that we want. And the truth is, like, when we want, I don't know, to go see a concert, when we want to take a trip, when we want to buy a certain item, like, we figure out how to get it done. But oftentimes, and that's also because we know how to do those things, right? But when we're starting our business or we're going into any sort of new venture, it feels uncomfortable. And like, our brain is just doing its job and trying to keep us safe. So I rely on journaling. And I tell myself, okay, what is the circumstance? What is happening? So let's say I want to launch something within my business, and that's the example that I have. And I've been sitting on it and I haven't been launching it. I start out with writing, okay, why haven't I launched this? And then I keep asking myself the question, but I keep challenging myself until I really get it down to almost dust of what the answer could be, because it's always what's behind it. And maybe it'll come, I don't think it's going to be successful. I don't think people are going to buy it. Why don't you think people are going to buy it? I haven't put enough effort into it. I haven't been building community. I haven't been posting on social. How come you haven't been posting on social? Maybe I'm comparing myself to other people. Why are you comparing yourself to other people? So you see how that goes? Every
Yes.
time you have a thought, it's up to you to challenge yourself. So think of the little kid in the car that keeps asking, are we there yet? And it becomes really annoying, but like, you need to be that little kid in the car and ask yourself, are you there yet? Meaning, have we gotten to the actual root of the problem? Once you get to that and you can identify it, after that, Ryan, it becomes so easy to spot. So those roadblocks that happen, you can knock them down so much faster because you can say, okay, I see what's going on in my brain right now. I'm doing the same thing that I've done before. Now I can get over it quicker.
Yeah, I love that. And as you're talking about it, it makes me think of like, so I come from a, are you familiar with UX design? Do you know what that is? I know you
Yep, user
were in the
experience.
marketing. Yeah, so that's the
Yes.
background that I come from, and doing research and all of that. And we would use this thing that we would call like five whys, like the five whys. You would just keep asking why to drill down on like whatever problem it is that we're trying to solve to get to like the real problem. And that's kind of what came to my mind as you were talking about like, okay, so why do I think that? And then why, and just keep digging. I think that's a good way of framing it. And it also just reminded me, I was talking to my mom because she's always talking about how she wants to do like put together a business with doing like bookkeeping and stuff like that. And I was like, Mom, why aren't you doing that? And then she was like, well, I'm waiting on this certification. And I was like, Mom, you literally used to do that. Like, you don't need you don't need a certification to start. You could just start and then get the certification. And she's like, you're right.
It's
So,
so true. My clients deal with that all the time. I have this one client who's very well credentialed, but she thinks she needs one more thing in order for her to actually go out and start to get clients. And really, the thing is, she doesn't want to sell. So she has this fear of selling. And so we've had to work through that because I thought, well, but what about this credential? What about that credential? What about this credential? And she's like, yes, but. And that yes, but is always an indicator of there's actually something that's fear based that's probably holding you back. Because the credential oftentimes doesn't really matter. So the difference between being a business owner and going to work in a corporate job is the corporate job is asking you about your resume. A lot of times when we're an entrepreneur, no one's saying, well, then show me your resume, show me your college degree, show me this. People want case studies. They want to understand how you can help them. But mostly they want to understand, can you help me solve my problem? Whether it's somebody who's selling a candle and the problem is, I want my house to smell great every time I come home, or it's a service based business that is doing wellness or spa treatments. Are you going to make my body feel good? That's what people really want to know. And sometimes I think we lose sight of that. So we lose sight of what the actual customer wants and the people that we're serving because we're so caught up in our head thinking about us. And if we can just make that switch of like, oh, I'm thinking about myself again, then it starts to put you in the mindset of by me thinking about the next credential or the other thing that I should be doing instead, it's preventing you from actually serving the people that need your help.
yeah, and that's a really good framing too, because at the end of the day, if you're starting a business, if you're doing something, you're you're creating some type of value, something that is going to help your clients, and it's kind of your responsibility, your duty to give that to the world. And I think that that's like a good reframe to be like, all right, I got to do this, like so. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I mean, I think one of the great things about just kind of like where we are in the world right now is that we have the ability for all of the areas that we have historically have been gate kept from, I guess is the word.
Yeah.
We have the ability now to remove those gates for other people because we all have an expertise. We all are experts at something, whether it's our own story and how can we take our own story to help someone else. So if you were someone that was in tremendous amount of debt and now you got out of debt, that can actually help somebody. If you are skilled in graphic design, you don't have to just do it for a corporate entity. You can also do it for someone else that is requiring your services. So there's so many ways that we have this expertise, but because we've been so conditioned to think that it has to come straight out of a book, that it has to have letters at the end of it, that some corporate entity of some kind has had to stamp or validate our existence, we think that we can't actually do it. And so I love to see the paradigm start to shift where people are saying like, bump that. Like I absolutely can do that and I will do that. And so that's what I want more of us and more of our communities to start to do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so I know you mentioned a little bit earlier that you do like speaking engagements and stuff like that. I was looking at your site and I saw you often speak about personal branding. why is it crucial? And I also know that you focus a lot. I think your website was saying you are interested in working with women, and
Yes.
why is that especially crucial for women in their professional growth?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think personal branding is important for all of us, especially as we start to think about, I think AI or something related to AI was the most searched term of 2023. So a lot of people are hearing about AI, trying to understand what that is, trying to advance themselves in that skill set. But what's not going to go out of style is us and our personal stories. And as we start to think, how are we going to compete against so many jobs and an entire culture that is going to shift to utilize AI more and more? Our personal brand is the thing that can't be duplicated and it can't be replicated. Our stories can appear very similar, but you're gonna have a flavor of your story, Ryan, that I'm not gonna have in mine, and vice versa. And those are gonna be the things that help us connect with other people. Whether we want to get a promotion, whether we wanna switch careers, start a business, grow our customer base, leverage a podcast, have speaking engagements, like our personal brand and our story is going to be the thing that helps separate us from the next person. So, specifically, when I think about women, if you think of the time that we're in, so many people continue to speak for us. You have policies that are changing and things that are happening just politically and in the government where there's not as much agency as I think we should have. We should have agency to do and say and be the things that we want to do, be. And then in the 1970s, like if we think back at that, it wasn't until the 70s when women could actually open their own bank account without having to have somebody else co-sign. To be able to get a credit card came later. Like this is recent times. This is our parents' generation. This is wild to me to think about that. And so, even when you think about books that are written and television shows and movies that are produced, a lot of the writers' rooms are still predominantly male. Now, I'm not here to bash on any male, but at the same time, to have stories that are written by women for women, like think about what that does to have somebody's human experience actually be created by someone else who is also a woman. I wouldn't want to necessarily write for you or presume to know about your life. So the same thing when I think about women is when we're told, especially in Latin culture, a lot of times we're told children should be seen and not heard. Or if a girl is to be pretty, right? To be pretty, but to also stay quiet. Like there's all of these like old school ideologies that have been passed on to us. And that prevents us from getting the bag, from making money, for asking for the promotion, for raising our hand for speaking engagements. So I want women to be more of themselves and to really be the thought leaders that they are and not shy away from that. So if I can help women start to do that, then I really think it's about having one hand up when someone's pulling me up and one hand down so I can pull someone else up.
Yeah, I love it. There's a lot in there to pick apart. Like I so my long-term goal and vision is to help you know marginalized entrepreneurs build build businesses that are going to actually make change and have a real impact and stuff. And that kind of comes from my personal story of working in corporate America, being in so many awkward, weird situations. And it's just like, but that's kind of me taking my story and then figuring out how I can turn that into my brand and put that out. And it sounds like it's a similar thing for you coming from that space. And
Absolutely. If I could just add, so like
but
one of this, when I speak on a bunch of different topics, but some of the topics I do speak on are diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I'm able to tell the story of working in a company that was mostly male. And so I was the only female on the team. And this one woman from another team kept calling me Maria. And I just thought, okay, like the first time you try to let it go because you think like, all right, maybe it's not what I'm thinking that it is. And I corrected her. My name is Monica. Next time I see her, hey Maria, my name is Monica. And then you start to realize, like, no, 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 you're choosing to make that mistake because you're correlating me as a Latina that my name is Maria, and you're not taking the time to actually learn it. And it wasn't until we're all in the office kitchen and the VP had come in, who was also a woman. And I called out this woman in front of her. And I was like, oh, the funniest thing. She always seems to call me Maria. She never seems to remember my name is Monica. Do you think that woman ever called me Maria again? Nope, because she was called out in front of this VP. And I don't care how she felt because she didn't care how I felt. So now when I go and I speak on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, I can share a story like that. And it's part of my personal brand to talk about my lived experiences. Because if I can talk to people and just tell them what my story is, maybe there's someone in the room that thinks, yeah, I might have called Joe Jose, right? Like there's all of these things that they might be checking themselves on. Or if somebody else has had to experience, at least they feel like I'm not the only person that's had to go through this. But that's like just a small example of how I can use something that happened with me when it comes to speaking.
Yeah. And yeah, I love that. Like, and being able to, again, take those situations and turn that into your story and your brand. It makes me think about a book that I just recently read, titled, it's called, Unfair Advantage. It's called The Unfair Advantage, and it was by a couple entrepreneurs, and they were talking about like everyone has um privileges or different things that happen in their life that give them some sort of unfair advantage, and there's a way to be able to tap into it. And sometimes it comes from that unfair advantage is actually something that's very negative that happened in your life, but it gives you some type of story or understanding or insight that someone else wouldn't have, or it's just, or it's something really nice like you grew up with a wealthy family, and all that might be your unfair advantage. But the cool part about it is that we all have a unique story and a unique unfair advantage that we need to figure out and tap into. And what I'm hearing from you and what you probably do is help your clients figure out that story. I'm guessing, right? What
Yeah, absolutely. And then a lot, oftentimes, we can't really be distilled to just one story, but there will be two, three, or four themes that have happened within our lives, especially depending on our age. But all of those themes can be extracted and used at different times to create connection. And when I say used, it's really about just creating connection. So I can talk about growing up in the Bronx and my unfair advantage, and I love the idea of that and the play on those words is that I grew up in the Bronx, but I grew up in the hood. But I also went to a white school that was not in the neighborhood. And so I had this unfair advantage of knowing how to operate in both of these worlds, which helped me out later on. So when I went to corporate America, I'm not gonna say I navigated it seamlessly because I was pulled and told that I was a little rough around the edges, but it made me far more comfortable than if I hadn't had the experience of going to white schools my entire life. So it's like that's one of the things that I would think about there. And then at different stages of your life, you're gonna have different things to be able to pull from, to connect, to serve, and then maybe actually become your business.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's what I'm trying to move out of, is having to do that code switching that you're talking
Oh my
about.
God, yeah, it's exhausting, absolutely
So
exhausting.
exhausting. So could you give some tips on how you can start building a compelling personal brand?
For sure. So I say the first thing is to start with the vision of what you want to achieve, right? And so oftentimes, let's say somebody was going to run a marathon. They just don't start running and then one day say like, "Hey Ryan, I ran 26.2 miles today." They usually start with, "I want to run a marathon." And then they back into like, "Okay, this is what my training plan is going to be for however many weeks it is." When we think of our work, we usually fall into our work. We're not really told, like, design what you want your life to be. Like, where do you want to live? Do you want to work with coworkers? Or do you want to have coworkers in the office every day? Do you want to work on your own? Do you want to retire early? Like, we're not really thinking about those things. We're so conditioned of, like, you get this job, you work until you're, I don't know, 65, 67, then you retire, and, like, that's it. It's like a very linear process. And I believe when we think about our life, especially if we're going to decide to make a pivot, like starting a personal brand, where think about it, there's so much beauty in saying, I'm going to create something from scratch. So if this was my dream scenario, what would I want it to look like? So that's where I say start with the vision first. Once you have the vision of, maybe it's, I want to speak on stage. It could be, I want to write a book one day. But have what that vision looks like for your life. And then decide what are the 2 or 3 things, no more than 3, 2 or 3 things that you want to be known for. Because the biggest thing you want, and I know there's so many multi-passionate people out there, and I raise my hand because I'm one too. But the lesson that I had to learn for myself is that you want people to be able to think of you when an opportunity comes up. Now, if I'm known for travel and podcasting and baking and sports and this, it's very confusing to people. Like our brains, think about when we enter a room, we instantly think, okay, what's the gender breakdown of the room? What's the ethnicity breakdown of the room? Are people wearing red shirts versus blue shirts? Like all these things are happening in our subconscious without us really consciously thinking about it. And that's because, again, our brains just want us to be able to categorize as quickly as possible. So if Ryan, you tell me that you like these 10 things, maybe my brain will remember 1 or 2, or it might not remember anything because you've given me too much information to hold. But if I think about you and now I can think, oh, Ryan, Chicago, podcasting. If I meet somebody else who's also in this space, I would say, you got to meet my boy Ryan. He's also in Chicago and he does podcasting, right? You want to be able to make those connections easy for people so that when opportunities come up, you're the name that they think of. So those are
Yeah,
the 2 things I would start with.
that's really good because yes, there's so many multi. I think about the uncle, the uncle that you have that like can do everything and has run like every business and it's just like the jack of all trades. Where you like, but he's probably not the best at any of those things, That's kind of what I think of because like everyone's so multi-passionate. I was talking to my little sister who was trying to put together a astrology business, and I was like, "Well, what are you gonna do with like who's gonna be your customer?" And she's like, "Well, anybody could be my customer." I was like, "No, we gotta pick. Like, let's start with something, so that you can be known for that and be that person that oh, like I'm having this problem. Maybe she can help me with this."
Yeah,
So yeah,
I love this story. So I use this a lot. So I listen to podcasts, and I've listened to podcasts for like 15 years now. One of the podcasts I listen to, I'm a big sports fan, is the Ryan Russillo podcast. And he was like, used to be on ESPN. And he's this guy who is from New England. He has all of the characteristics you would think about of a dude from New England. And he's very like, he gives you like a older, used to be in a frat, drinks a lot of beer, really sarcastic, all of those things. But he's also like very thoughtful about his sports takes. So he's not just saying whatever, he's really thoughtful about it. And so I personally love the way he interviews. I am not Ryan Russillo's target audience by any means. His target audience is so clear. I'm a marketer, it's so clear. He has somebody probably between like 34 and 40, or 24 and 40, either somebody who's just coming out of college or someone who thinks about like, oh yeah, when I used to play football, like that kind of vibe. They probably go to the bar with their friends a couple times a week. If they're married, maybe they're lucky to go once a week, and they talk about their wives and complain and like do all those things. That is Ryan Russillo's target audience, right? And I don't knock it. But
yeah,
notice, I am not a dude. I am not in a frat. I'm none of those things. But I say this to say that start out really taking care of your audience, right? And so in the case of your sister in the astrology, that's like perfect advice of who do you actually want to help? Because people that are interested in astrology, even if they're not her target audience, if there's one thing about her business that she does well that people like, she's going to get the people that are on the outside of the circle that naturally come and say like, oh, I'm curious about what she's talking about when it comes to this, right? So same thing like Ryan Russillo. He would never choose me. I would never be part of the focus group. But because I just happen to love sports, spent a lot of years watching ESPN, and I kind of love a sarcastic person that's really thoughtful, I listen to his show. But again, it's like he's not thinking about me when he's creating his show. And I know that, and I'm totally fine with it, but I listen anyway.
yeah. I love that. I love that. It's funny. Uh, Quick question: if you're a sports person, what sports and what teams? I'm just curious.
Literally all sports. So I'm an only child. My dad taught me everything there was to know about sports. So I watch everything from boxing to wrestling, tennis, football, baseball, soccer, basketball, all of it. My sports are, this is going to be crazy, and people are going to want to ring me up for it. I actually am a Patriots fan. It used to be better to be a Patriots fan back in the day. Now I'm kind of feeling it. I'm also a Yankees fan because, of course, I'm from the BX. And then basketball, I'm actually a Miami Heat fan, but not because of LeBron or any of those things. I had a love when I was younger who went to school at the University of Miami. And I thought, well, if you're going to go to University of Miami, I'm going to like the Miami Heat. It was like very cheesy and all of that. But I ended up rocking with the team. I don't rock with the dude anymore, but I rock with the team nonetheless.
Hey, you know what? Heat. I like. So we're here in Chicago. So D Wade. We love D Wade, and then also Jimmy Butler.
Of course,
Love
him,
Jimmy.
himmy.
And so, and I love their, what was it called? The like Vice City kind of like the jerseys that they had that had like
Yes,
the pink and the, I love it.
yeah, the play on Miami Vice. Yeah, it was really dope.
Yeah.
And D
So
Wade just got a statue outside of the arena and everything erected for him, so that's pretty cool. But yeah, so those are my teams. But I could talk sports. If you ever want to talk sports, Ryan, I'm your person. I love talking about sports.
that we could definitely do that. Um, but let's get back to some of this discussion. So, you were mentioning you kind of mentioned this a little bit, but imposter syndrome. It's a common challenge. Can you share some effective strategies that you? I know this is something that you talk about a little bit. Can you share some of the strategies that you use to navigate that imposter syndrome?
Absolutely. So the first thing is it all comes back to awareness. So understanding what is actually happening for you. So imposter syndrome, very simply put, is if you have this level of self-doubt or you feel like you shouldn't be doing whatever the thing is you're thinking about doing. Like this shouldn't be me, this should be somebody else. Like any of those thoughts that kind of sound familiar to that, that's usually imposter syndrome that's starting to peek its head out. So once you have that awareness, I want you to actually call it out. And I know this is going to sound crazy, but I promise you it's effective. I've done this in workshops, I've done this with my clients, but name your imposter. So give it a name. Somebody called theirs Daisy because they felt like it was a weed, right? That they needed to keep plucking out of the ground, right? So Daisy like a
Yeah.
flower. And so that's how they named their imposter syndrome. And every time they would start to feel something, they'd be like, okay, Daisy, I see you. Thank you so much, but you need to like chuck deuces and get out of here. And so she started to implement the strategy of actually naming it and then calling it out and then coming up, I say come up with an evidence bank of things that you have already accomplished, right? And so when you think about the new year, instead of reflecting back on like things you wish you would have done differently, I want people to think like every month, every quarter, start to make a list of like what value did I add into the world this week? What value did I add to my family this month? What did I contribute? What did I create? What am I proud of? Right? Because so often we don't think about that. And then I don't know about you, but at the end of the year, I don't remember what I did in February or March. But if I say once a month, I'm going to write down the things that I accomplished, the things that I feel good about, you start to create evidence, evidence to showcase I am capable of these things. I do have this evidence of having accomplished great things before, whether it was graduating college or starting a business, getting a promotion, creating consistent content, having a lot of engagement, having a wonderful group of friends, contributing something at work, receiving an award, whatever those things are, like we need to start actually writing those things down because we need to remind ourselves that we're not an imposter. Because the truth is, there's nobody out here pointing fingers at us saying you're an imposter. The imposter syndrome is self-imposed. It's actually coming from us, right? And yes, of course, there's external conditioning of the way people have seen us or treated us and marginalized us. But also when it comes to actually taking the actions, like these voices, it's not them anymore. It has to come from us. So we have to be louder than the voices, whether internally or externally, that try to stop us. So first, recognize that it's happening, then give it a name so that you can welcome it, call it out, and then create your evidence list to actually start to counterbalance those effects of imposter syndrome. And then I say this all the time: action is the antidote to fear. If we stay in a place of action, then we don't give that fear a chance to grow. When we stay inactive and we're actually in our heads, that's where we feel like the fear becomes bigger. And it's like, why is that happening? It's because we're giving it so much space and so much life to take hold of our brain. That it's like, think about it. If on Monday you were stressed about it and you still haven't done something by the following Monday, now you're beating yourself up for a week has gone by, or I could have done this a month ago, I could have done this a year ago. And then all that's happening is that it's taking over your body and you're still not getting the thing done. So those are my ways to counteract it.
I love that. I never thought of naming it, and now I'm sitting there like, all right, what am I gonna name this? Name this guy. I hate when people call me Brian instead of Ryan, and I feel like my imposter is gonna be named Brian.
That would be great. That would be so good. And it'll probably make you laugh. And now every time somebody calls you Brian, we just think about, your imposter.
Yeah. No, and I love that too. Like the writing it down. So I have direct reports where I we would do a thing that I call a hype doc, where we would like collect like different things that they might learn, or or different things that they've tried. And so that's kind of a way that I've tried to do that in the past. But also, I was telling someone, I had read or heard this somewhere, but this is kind of related about building up confidence. And the way to build confidence, what this guy said was, it's about making promises to yourself and keeping those promises. And so, even thinking of like, all right, what are some small promises that I can make to myself? And then actually take it a step further, like you're saying, and write that thing down. Like for instance, I decided last week, I was like, I'm gonna start like doing real like I'm gonna start prospecting to get me some clients because I'm trying to build this book. So I was like, every morning I'm going to message 25 people on LinkedIn. And I did it. Like I've been keeping my little tallies right here, and I'm like, yeah, I'm doing that. Like, and I'm meeting cool people, and and that's kind of building back my confidence. Like I know what I'm talking about, and so I think, yeah, that action will help you kind of get out of those little spouts of doubt, I guess.
Yeah, I want to give you props because that's a big deal. Like cold emailing people is really tough to do, but the fact that you're doing it, I'm telling you, and like you're gonna learn so much even from that process. Because even if you get no's, you're gonna be able to see like how is somebody telling me no? Are they saying something specific about this? It's like, okay, great. Now I can revise my process next week, right? So it's all data that they're giving you, which is fantastic. So by the third week, the fourth week, or even the third month, you're gonna have that process refined so that people are gonna perk up every time they receive a message from you.
And it's so crazy too because like it took me so long to send the first email, and now I'm just popping them out. Like, like that first one, I'm like all that fear in the back of my head, like, oh man, what if I say the wrong thing? And I'm like, it doesn't matter. Just
Yeah,
do it.
it really doesn't. I received a rejection email last week for a grant that I applied to. I kid you not. When I read it, the first thing I thought was, what grant was this? It wasn't even that I was turned down. It was like, I don't even remember applying for this. And so then I thought, okay. And I just, saved it to the archives and like kept it pushing because that's the thing. Like once you're in the process of doing, like you're just not going to let the no's get you down because you know that there's so many other stokes in the fire that you're not going to be thinking about that. You're going to be like, okay. Or you're going to think maybe if they were to give you feedback, okay, how can I use this feedback to inform my next grant proposal or whatever it is that you're doing? But honestly, it's only when you're not taking enough chances that that sting really hits. Think about if you were going to go try to kick it to a man or a woman or whatever that was. If you only do it one time, it's going to feel like a bruised ego, right? But if you go on and you come in with like this really positive attitude of I'm just here to meet people and try to have a good time and make some connections, the energy is totally different than if you're hanging all your hopes and dreams on just this one email, this one grant, whatever that thing is.
Yeah. Yeah. You just gotta shoot your shot.
Yes,
Gotta shoot the
exactly.
shot.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. I got a bunch of questions here. I want to make sure we get to like the good ones. Um, what advice do you have for women looking to package and monetize their skills? So we talked about build the brand itself, but the actual money side of this.
Yeah, so once you're able to identify the thing that you want to be known for, and usually it'll be more than one thing, right? Because we talked about being multifaceted. We also have different themes of our stories throughout our lives. I want you to make a list of all the things that you want to be known for, but then start to think about, based on this list of things I want to be known for, what problem would this solve out in the world? So again, if you want to be known for being able to get out of debt, if you want to be known for getting over a divorce and like finding a way that you rebounded, if you want to be known for how you're able to find jobs and you're so good at job hunting and searching and interviewing, right? Think about, okay, well, who's going to best be served by my skill, by my superpower, by my expertise? And then think about, okay, not everything is going to have an exact one-to-one fit. So if I tell you, like, Ryan, I'm really great at folding clothes. Okay, is that going to be the thing I want to be known for? And I could decide like yes or no. And if it's no, then I cross that off the list and I go down to something else. But you have to really think about, who is this going to help? Like, what's that market size look like of people that might actually need me or need this message, or the customer base or whatever that is. But start to think about what that market fit then looks like once you have the list of things you want to be known for. And then the last piece, once you decide, this is what I want to be known for, this is how I can help people, then identify how you're going to be able to do it differently than somebody else. This is where you start to put like your own sazon, your own little spice on it, right? Because we're not here trying to copy somebody else's playbook. The whole point of building your personal brand is it has to be personal to you, not the next person. And so then think about, how are you going to sprinkle your own special sauce on that?
That and I love the folding example because I instantly thought of a page that I follow that's literally the folding lady, and she has all these interesting ways how she folds stuff, but it can
You
literally
know what's
be
funny? I say that because I actually love folding. I really
yeah.
do. But I couldn't tell you how I could personally monetize that. I don't think I could ever. I also follow the folding lady. I could never be better than her. Like, I think of it like, I don't know how I would do this better. So that's gonna be her lane, and I just went to someplace else on my list.
Yeah. And like actually something that happened while I was talking as I was doing the prospecting and all of that, kind of how you mentioned like the feedback that you get. Some of the feedback that I got was that my target was too broad, and my offering was too broad. And so when you're kind of finding your lane, sometimes that's like, it's not like you have to have it figured out at the beginning, but as you start to get some of that feedback and figure out your lane, like you can tighten stuff up a little bit more. So
Yes,
yeah.
there's always that refinement. There's this woman. Her name is Shalene Johnson. And I kid you not, I'm not quite sure how I even came into her orbit of like her corner of social media. I think I might have been on a virtual event and she was one of the speakers. But she was talking about pivoting in business. And she had initially started buying cars in Michigan at like the auctions. And so she was a woman and she would buy cars at these auctions and then she would flip them for more money. Then later, she was very interested in personal training, but realized like while she was doing the personal training, she kept losing count of like how much her clients had done in terms of reps, because she kept thinking about like, I can teach other personal trainers how to build their businesses. So she always had a really good business mind. So then she started a business to teach other personal trainers how to become fully booked. And then she went on to, I think, invent this thing called Payo, which is like Pilates and yoga, which is this actual like workout that she then sold for like millions and millions of dollars with her and her husband. And then she pivoted to like doing something else. And I think now she talks about like ADHD, and she might be over 50. So she might talk to like the over 50 women and all that. But she talked about, stay doing something that you're proficient in for a certain amount of time. And as you build people and community and followers, and people really start to enjoy you for the personal brand you are and the things that you're talking about, you can then make pivots. And that people who really like you, like genuinely as a person, will stay rocking with you as you move on to the next iteration of life. And then you'll have new people that come on board because now you're talking about the new thing. But you have to kind of stay with one thing for a little while, but then also understand that you can evolve just like a musician evolves and the music sounds. Like think of like someone like Taylor Swift. She started out in country and now she's making $1 billion off her tour doing pop music. So she shifted. It's still music, but she did make changes along the way. And so I would advise, even when you're multi-passionate, you feel that reluctance to want to niche down. Like the niching is so important. There's a expression, the riches are in the niches. Because like people are actually looking for that specific thing that you offer, and you can always go wide later on, but at least get to be known about for that one thing now.
Yeah. And so this actually kind of goes well into this next question, kind of balancing because yeah, you want to focus and have all of that, but how do you help your clients find a balance between pursuing their passions and maintaining the practical business sense? Because I'm sure they want to do all like we all like you said, we're all multi-passionate, but we also have to focus. So how do we kind of do that? Uh I can't hear you right now.
Sorry about that.
Oh,
So
there we go.
it starts with our life design. And so when we think about what we want our life to look like, it helps narrow the focus for us of like what we want our business to actually be. And when I say our business or our side hustle, whatever that is, even if it's a new job or promotion, really let's just think about like in the next like 2 to 3 years, right? Like we're not trying to map out like this is what I want my business to look like in 40 years from now, right? But even if we have a vision for the next 2 to 3 years, it helps us start to understand like what does this look like. So if we are multi-passionate, I had a client one time who tried to convince me that in order for her to write a book, she needed to go back to school and get another degree. And then after she got the degree, she was going to have to get a job in a certain field. And once she got the job in a certain field, then she could write the book. And I said, well, how long do you think this is going to take? And she said, I don't know, probably about 4 or 5 years. And I said, you want to wait 4 or 5 years to write a book, but you already have a PhD, but you want to get another one? She's like, well, I just think it'll be better for the book. So like that's an example of how she didn't think at that time like she had the expertise, but she knows she had the expertise. You're a PhD, you have these letters after your name. That could be your second book or your third book or your fourth book, right? So again, it comes back to one, defining that vision and then understanding like just pick the one thing. Like when we say that we can't figure it out or we're not sure, again, the answer isn't that we're not sure. The answer is, I don't know if I'm going to be successful at this. And as long as we can keep asking ourselves or saying to ourselves, I don't know if I'm going to be successful, then we don't have to actually fail, right? It's so much easier for us to live in this thinking period of like the person who's like, well, if I hadn't blown out my arm, I would have been a great quarterback, right? It's that thing of like, well, if only these things had happened, I would have been amazing here. It's so much easier to be able to say that story than to think, yeah, I tried this thing and it didn't go well. It wasn't the outcome that I wanted, right? Like that thought of maybe that even happening feels so daunting. But what I've learned from myself and especially from people in our community, like BIPOC community, is so often we think, what is everything that can go wrong? And like that usually is our default. What can go wrong? Why is this not going to work? And I feel like this is such a sad thing that we are burdened with because in other communities, their first thought is what is going to go right. And so we have to work on knocking that thought off and taking a battering ram to that thought of always defaulting to all of the things that are going to go wrong because we've been conditioned to be in this hyper-vigilant state of always having to think about everything that can go wrong just in order to keep ourselves safe. So we really have to work on practicing what if it all went right?
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, when we do that, when we're focused so much on what could go wrong, we're also making negative manifestations, you know? Like we're like attracting the bad things.
Yeah. We're
So
calling those things in, actually. And it's, what is the expression? Like where focus goes, energy flows, right? And so we're actually flowing our energy to the exact outcome that we don't want. And I just want to be really clear. It took me a long time to get to the place where I really focused on mindset over strategy, because I, at my core, have a very survival mindset, right? Growing up how I did and all of those things, it was about how am I going to survive? And so for me, that was very strategic. It was literally, how am I going to be okay sleeping in my car one night? How am I going to get money so I can rent an apartment? How am I going to pay for college? Like very strategic things. I couldn't at the time mindset myself into those very real situations. But as I was able to get some distance and some breathing room and all of those things, I started to realize the whole time I had this knowing of I'm going to be okay. And I don't know where this came from, but regardless, I had a belief like it's going to work out. I'm going to
yeah,
be able to figure that out. So while I thought it was all strategy, yes, it was strategy in part, but I think also I didn't give myself credit for really believing I can figure this out. I am resourceful and I'm going to figure this out. And I think because I had that almost as like my operating system in the background, I was able to figure it out.
yep,
But if I had the thought of I'm not going to be able to figure it out, then all this strategy in the world wasn't going to matter to me. And it wasn't until later when I had like some distance and some breathing room, I could be like, oh, that's how that was working together. So they both have to work. If one is off, if one light is off and the other one is on, you're not going to get the outcome you want. You have to get them working together.
yeah. I also just peeked at the time, so I know we're like over a little bit. So I'll try to round this out a little bit. Can you tell me what's the future look like for you want to do what?
I love it. I love it. So the future for me is, of course, I want to continue to serve people through my one-on-one coaching practice, but I also want to continue to go into corporations and speak not just on these one-off engagements, but I want to actually be able to facilitate workshops that are starting to change the culture of companies. So when people think personal branding, a lot of times if a company invites me and they're like, you're not going to tell all of our employees to leave, right? And I'm like, no, of course not. And that's not what my goal is to do, which is try to get everyone to have this mass exodus out of the company. But I do feel like it's important, whether we're working within a company or we're working for ourselves, to build that personal brand, because it is going to serve us well beyond whatever company or business or anything we're a part of, because that's always going to be our calling card that we can use. So when I think about that vision, I want to be able to go into more companies and help facilitate that in community spaces to share with others how to actually build that for themselves. I also want to continue. I have this thought of I would like to write a book, and I've wanted to write a book since I was 5 years old. I kid you not. I told my parents, I'm going to write a book. And I wrote like a little murder mystery when I was like 7, and I had my dad like draw the cover for me and everything like that. I used to be really big into murder mysteries. And so I'd like to write a book one day. And so that's part of the vision, again, for myself. And then ultimately, when I think about my niece, I want to be able to create a life experience for her where she feels courageous enough to do things that are unconventional. I want her to feel like she can walk a path, even if not a lot of people have walked on it before, but she's willing to try it. And so right now she's 6, and if I can help cultivate that in her in little ways where I might start singing while we're walking down the street and she gets like all shy, like, oh, Dee, stop singing, singing. I always want her to feel like she doesn't have to put on for someone else, but she can like show up exactly as her. And so if I can help cultivate that, like that would be the grandest vision of all.
Yeah, I mean, with you involved, she's probably gonna end up being an unstoppable force.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you. Thank
Um,
you.
any projects, any upcoming projects or initiatives that you're excited about that people should know about?
So I have a bunch of keynotes already booked, thankfully, for 2024, which I'm really excited about. So the thing with the keynotes is that they usually happen in company, so I can't invite other people to them, but hoping to get on some stages so that people can come and meet me. I love to meet people in person. So if there are any communities or organizations that would like that, I would love to be able to partner in that way to do that. And then if there's anybody listening right now that is looking to take their expertise and build a personal brand, then I invite you to just sit down and book a call. And let's just talk about where your goals are. And I'm really honest. If I'm not the person that can help you, I'm 100% going to say that. But if there's even an inkling that you have something you want to tap into, then don't let that feeling go, whether it's me or with somebody else.
Yeah, definitely. And then we'll end it with two more questions. One is what's the top piece of advice that you would give to women aspiring to start their own business or their own personal brand?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. What is the piece of advice? Everything you want is on the other side of yes. I truly believe that. Everything you want is on the other side of yes. But it starts with saying yes to yourself. So to kind of take it back to how we initially began this conversation, I was the thing that was stopping me.
Hmm.
And even today, I don't feel like external forces are the things that I have to worry about. It's more internal. And so I know that any project that I want, any vision that I have for myself, starts with me first saying yes to whatever those actions are going to be. So similar to the gentleman that talked about like the consistency of showing up for yourself every day and actually keeping the promise to yourself, I think of it that same way. I have to start by saying yes to the thing, and then everything else goes from there. But it all begins with that decision. And for me, that decision has to be yes. And I hope that other women, men, whoever are listening to this also start with the yes.
And I'm trying to, so like I said, like I was telling you before we started recording, my hope is to have guests for this show for the rest of the year. So I'm stealing something from another podcast. The you probably heard it, the CEO's Diary or whatever. And he does a thing where he asks the guest a question that um asks for a question to ask the next guest. So what's a question that you would have?
Oh, I love questions. I'm trying to think about what's the question that I would want to know if I was listening to the future episode. What has your hardest day looked like?
Hardest day?
Yeah. What has your hardest day looked like?
Are we gonna get deep on that one?
I think there's so much power in understanding somebody's hardest day.
Okay, yeah, I love it. So I'll have that question, and then I'll probably do like a sound bite from this one, and then bring that in.
Okay,
But
I would love it. Yeah. I mean, I think about your podcast, the Hard Knock podcast, right? Like
yeah,
when we think about it, like the hardest day that somebody has, I think is so telling of what their lived experience is.
yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the show. This has been a great conversation. I learned a lot, and yeah, this has been really fun.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And this has been, you ask such thoughtful questions, and it's like so easy to talk to you. The time went by. And like my niece says, I tell my niece, time flies when you're having fun. And she kind of fumbles the word a little bit wrong, but she kind of has the gist of it. But that's how I felt with you. Time flies when you're having fun.